Imagine owning something that millions of people need every single day. A place everyone has to reach, where every customer pays simply to use your infrastructure. From the outside, it looks like the perfect business, steady revenue, little competition, and a monopoly that is nearly impossible to replicate. But there is a reality almost no one knows about. Some of the most powerful businesses in the world have lost billions of dollars, not because they lacked customers, but because of a hidden problem that made them appear invincible. Understanding that problem reveals how the world's biggest businesses really work. It all comes down to what happens between that dream and reality. How much it costs to enter this industry, how much it costs to keep it running, what happens when the world stops flying, and why even the wealthiest investors have lost fortunes on airports that seemed like perfect investments. Let's begin with the first question. Who actually sells airports? For most of history, airports were built and operated by governments using public funds. But starting in the 1980s, that began to change. Governments realized they owned extremely valuable assets, and investors understood that controlling a monopoly with guaranteed traffic could generate returns for decades. That sparked a wave of privatizations across more than 90 countries. Today, more than 850 airports have some form of private sector participation. In Europe, nearly 76% of passengers use privatized airports, while in Latin America the figure is around 78%. The United States is an exception. Most of its major airports remain publicly owned because its financing system makes privatization far less attractive. Governments usually transfer airports in one of three ways: a direct sale, a public stock offering, or, most commonly, a long-term concession that allows a private company to operate the airport for several decades before returning it to the government. One example is Sydney Airport. In 2002, it was granted under a 99-year concession, and 2 decades later, a group of Australian investment funds acquired control of it for approximately 32 billion Australian dollars, making it the largest infrastructure acquisition in the country's history. Why would anyone pay that much? Because investors do not buy an airport based on what it earns today, but on what it can generate over the coming decades. They evaluate how much it earns before interest and taxes, and if the projections are solid, they are buying much more than a business. They are buying a monopoly within a city. But purchasing an existing airport is only one option. What happens if you want to build one from scratch? The first step is securing the land. An international airport requires between 50 and 140 square kilometers of space. Acquiring that much land and meeting all legal requirements can cost hundreds of millions of dollars before construction even begins. Then come the runways. These are not ordinary roads. They are structures designed to support aircraft weighing hundreds of tons for decades. Building a single runway can easily cost more than $1 billion. And that is only the beginning. Next come the terminals, security systems, control towers, parking facilities, access roads, baggage handling systems, backup power supplies, and all the infrastructure required to keep the airport operating 24 hours a day. In reality, an airport is a small city. It is no surprise that projects such as Beijing Daxing International Airport cost around $17 billion, or that Istanbul's new airport exceeded $12 billion in its first phase alone. On top of that, there are environmental permits, regulatory approvals, and years of paperwork that can delay a project for 3 to 5 years before the first flight ever takes off. And this is where the trap that has destroyed more airport projects than almost any other problem begins to appear. When construction is financed with debt, interest starts accumulating from day one, not when the airport opens. Every month of delay means paying millions of dollars without generating a single dollar in revenue. Berlin Brandenburg Airport is the best example. It was scheduled to open in 2011, but it finally opened 9 years later. Its budget increased from 2 billion to 7 billion euros, and to make matters worse, it began operating just as the pandemic brought air travel to a standstill. The project's lead expert warned that the airport would be unlikely to stop losing money and would probably depend permanently on public subsidies. But what caused a 9-year delay? It was not the materials, labor strikes, or the weather. The real problem was the fire safety system. It was integrated too late, failed during testing, and every defect forced construction to stop while the project was redesigned. Then safety regulations changed. Undocumented wiring was discovered. Staircases had incorrect dimensions, doors were defective, and the roof began to leak. No single mistake was catastrophic on its own, but together they added 4 billion euros to the cost and delayed the project by 9 years. Denver experienced something similar. Its opening was delayed by 16 months because of a $200 million automated baggage system that destroyed luggage during testing. While the airport remained closed, it lost approximately $1,100,000 every day in interest and operating expenses. Every day without flights meant another $1 million lost. Once an airport finally opens, its money comes from two main sources. The first is aeronautical revenue, the fees airlines pay to land, park their aircraft, and transport passengers. At Heathrow, a single landing by a wide-body aircraft can cost close to $9,000, in addition to a fee for every passenger. That sounds like a great business, but there is a problem. Governments regulate how much airports are allowed to charge. Because airports are natural monopolies, authorities impose limits to prevent abuse. In the United Kingdom, for example, the regulator reduced the maximum fee allowed per passenger, a decision Heathrow opposed because it believed the reduction would harm future investment. That is the reality. The government decides how much you can charge, and it will almost always be less than you would like. That is why major airports developed a second, far more profitable business, everything that happens away from the runways. Worldwide, non-aeronautical revenue accounts for nearly 37% of total airport revenue, and in many markets it is growing faster than income from flight operations. The best example is parking. Dallas-Fort Worth alone generated more than $250 million from parking in a single year. Why is it worth so much? Because the airport has complete control over the land surrounding it, and unlike landing fees, parking prices are almost never regulated. The same applies to stores and restaurants. Retail businesses pay either a percentage of their sales or a guaranteed minimum rent, ensuring that the airport receives income even when those businesses sell less than expected. And nothing is designed by accident. After passing through security, passengers enter areas specifically designed to help them relax and spend money. At many airports, it is impossible to reach the boarding gate without walking through retail stores, a strategy that can increase sales by as much as 60%. Even the layout of the hallways serves this purpose. Because most people carry their luggage with their right hand, many terminals feature curves that lead to the left, naturally directing passengers' attention toward products displayed on the right, where the highest margin items are usually placed. All of these revenue streams look extremely attractive on paper, but the real reason investing in an airport does not guarantee a fortune lies in everything it costs to keep one operating. Security is the first major expense. Every passenger and every piece of luggage must pass through screening equipment that complies with strict government regulations. When those regulations change, airports are required to upgrade their technology with no way to avoid the expense. On top of that are the baggage handling systems, which operate underground through miles of conveyor belts and require power, constant maintenance, and specialized personnel. If they fail, the airport can practically grind to a halt. Then come the permanent operating costs, emergency generators, rescue equipment, runway maintenance, and, in colder countries, enormous fleets of vehicles used to remove snow and ice. None of these expenses depends on passenger volume. Whether the airport handles 20 million travelers or 10 million, the lights remain on, security continues operating, and the runways must stay ready. The costs remain almost the same. The only thing that changes is revenue. Then the worst possible scenario arrived. In 2020, 2/3 of the world's commercial aircraft were grounded, and industry revenue fell by nearly 70%. For airports, it was a disaster. Debt payments, insurance, and operating expenses continued, while passengers disappeared. Airports went from generating hundreds of millions of dollars to earning almost nothing. Businesses inside the terminals could no longer pay the minimum rents they had agreed to because they simply had no customers. Many airports chose to eliminate those guaranteed payments and charge only a percentage of sales. They lost revenue in the short term, but prevented stores from going bankrupt and preserved their commercial model for when passenger traffic returned. The airports that adapted best went one step further. They transformed their terminals into cargo hubs. With passenger flights suspended, they began moving goods. used empty spaces as warehouses, and even converted commercial aircraft to transport products. It did not make up for all the losses, but it allowed them to maintain part of their revenue. However, not every airport faces the same problem. Small airports, with fewer than 1 million passengers per year, almost always lose money because they do not generate enough activity to cover their enormous fixed costs. Many survive only because of government support, but when they try to operate without subsidies, they often depend on a single low-cost airline. Ryanair has built a large part of its business model by taking advantage of this situation. In exchange for bringing in passengers, it negotiates discounted fees and multi-million-dollar incentives. The airport agrees because the alternative is to have empty terminals, but that dependency creates an enormous risk. If the airline decides to leave, it can turn a multi-billion-dollar piece of infrastructure into an almost deserted airport overnight. And there is an even more expensive mistake: building an airport for passengers who never arrive. These are known as ghost airports. The best-known example is Ciudad Real Airport in Spain. It was built to relieve congestion in Madrid, with an enormous terminal and one of the longest runways in Europe. On paper, it looked like a great investment. In reality, airlines never showed much interest because the demand simply did not exist. The airport went bankrupt only a few years after opening and was eventually sold for a tiny fraction of what it had cost to build. Today, it no longer serves passengers. It operates as a facility for storing and dismantling aircraft. Mattala Rajapaksa International Airport in Sri Lanka took the same mistake to an extreme. It was built with an investment of $290 million and was designed to handle 1 million passengers per year. Today, it receives barely a dozen passengers a day, while the government continues paying millions of dollars annually on the debt used to finance its construction. Part of its facilities was even used to store rice. In both cases, the mistake was the same: building an airport based on political ambition rather than real demand. No one asked the airlines first, and if airlines do not want to fly to a destination, passengers will not arrive either. Without passengers, there is simply no business. But what happens when an airport does everything right? That is where Aena comes in, Spain's largest airport operator. In 2024, it achieved an operating margin of nearly 60%, an extraordinary figure in any industry. Its commercial revenue grew even faster than passenger numbers, proving that a small increase in spending per traveler can translate into hundreds of millions of additional euros each year. Something similar happens with Fraport, the operator of Frankfurt Airport. Its strength does not come only from passenger volume, but from the fact that it is a major connecting hub that airlines cannot afford to abandon. That is the fundamental difference between a small airport and a large one. The small airport needs the airlines, while the large airport makes the airlines depend on it. And the future points even further ahead. Airports will stop being simple terminals and become the centers of entire cities. This is the model known as an aerotropolis, where hotels, logistics parks, industries, and research centers grow around the airport because they need fast connections to the rest of the world. For airport operators, this creates a new source of revenue through land development and leasing, which is far more stable than depending only on passengers. Another transformation is also taking place inside the terminals. Every minute a passenger spends waiting in line is a minute they are not shopping. That is why airports are investing in biometric systems that reduce waiting times and allow travelers to reach commercial areas more quickly. Less time at checkpoints means more time to spend money. So, is an airport really a good business? It depends on its scale. Small airports, with fewer than 1 million passengers per year, almost always lose money and usually survive because of government support. Medium-sized airports begin to benefit from the growth of commercial revenue and can reach a very attractive balance. But major airports, with tens of millions of passengers, operate in an entirely different league. Although they require enormous investments and face strict regulation, they generate massive amounts of cash through their scale and multiple revenue streams. Even so, the real challenge never disappears. Fixed costs continue every single day, whether a plane lands or not. A decline in passenger traffic, an increase in interest rates, or any major disruption can quickly turn a great business into a financial problem. That is why buying an airport does not mean acquiring only a company. It means controlling a strategic piece of infrastructure that airlines, passengers, businesses, and vehicles must pass through every day. In the right city and under strong management, it can become one of the most resilient assets in the world. The real question is not how much money it can generate, but whether you can survive long enough to reach the moment when that investment begins producing the enormous profits everyone imagines.